Hello, in this video we will start talking about production and costs, and today we're going to talk about three things: what a firm is, what the difference is between the short run and the long run, and finally how a firm's costs in the short run can be derived. This video is based on Chapter 5, the production process and costs on Bain prints. I'm deliberately skipping some parts, and I'll be focusing on the things that I think are the most important when it comes to the production process. So first of all, what is a firm? How do economists understand a firm? Uh, on the principles level, the understanding is a firm is a production function, and I'm going to carry this basic principles level on into the intermediate section for now, just so that we understand how costs can be obtained from the production function. Later, if you're interested, you can study more about the firm dynamics and how the profits that a firm generates can be split between workers and management, and add basically additional dimensions to what a firm is and why firms exist. But for now, just focus on a production function. Think about the firm as a kind of a black box, and you take some resources and you put the resources into the black box, and that black box, using a particular technology, a particular production function, just spits out the output. And when it comes to resources, we think about two kinds of resources: capital and labor, denoted with capital K, I guess, in honor of Karl Marx, and labor, I don't know, for Lenin maybe. And the output is just Q is the amount of units that the firm produces. So the firm produces identical units of some kind of output. So in a sense, it's a very old-fashioned, maybe 19th century or the beginning of 20th century understanding of what a firm is. It's just mass producing some particular product. So there's the only kind of decisions that we're going to be looking at in this setup is how much capital and how much labor to employ in order to produce a particular level of output. Similarly, at the principles level, you should be familiar with the firm's objective, which is to maximize profits. So again, you can argue that there are different kinds of firms operating in the world, and not necessary that all of them are only trying to maximize profits by all means, but to make things real simple for our basic analysis, profit maximization makes perfect sense. Then, if you understand profit maximizations, you can go ahead and add additional constraints and additional goals that the firm might have. But for now, let's just think about firms trying to maximize profits by translating capital and labor into output. Here is the expression for the profits. The profits is just the difference between the total revenue that the firm generates by selling its output and the total costs it incurs by producing it. Think of total revenue as just the product of price times quantity, and total costs of production are the costs of hiring labor and the cost of renting capital. So there are two kinds of costs because there are two kinds of inputs. And again, I hope that you remember at least some of it from the principles micro. We distinguish between the short run and the long run. And I'm going to go ahead here. In the short run, we assume that labor is variable and capital is fixed. And in the long run, we believe that both labor and capital are variable. So that's one assumption. And the second assumption that we're making is that labor and capital are coming from competitive markets. So that is, no matter how much capital you want to rent, or no matter how much labor you would like to hire, you're paying a fixed market price. So for capital, it's the fixed rent R, small r. For labor, it's the fixed wage W. And if you want to hire 100 workers or 100,000 workers, that wage rate does not change. same with the amount of capital. No matter how much capital you want to get, you pay in fixed price. And so think about the labor costs as variable costs in the short run, capital costs as fixed costs in the short run, and in the long run, both labor and capital are variable. There are no fixed costs. Now the next question is, what is the proper way of understanding the difference between the short run and the long run? The idea is, in the short run, capital is fixed, labor can be adjusted. Think about, again, pretend that we're in the early 20th century and we're talking about, okay, your capital is the factory and the machinery that you have in that factory and all sorts of equipment and all sorts of tools that you use to produce your output. And then you hire workers to work in that factory. You can't easily change the size of your factory. You can't easily expand or shrink your production when it comes to additional equipment or additional buildings. So in a sense, when you choose a particular factory site and a particular factory size, you lock yourself into a particular amount of capital. And if it takes you some time to move to a different site or increase the capacity of your existing plant, well, the time during which your level of capital is fixed, the duration of that time is the short run. And then once that time elapses, in principle, you can adjust capital, and then you will move to a new short run period where you will live with the new level of capital that's going to be fixed for a while as well. So think about this. A firm just moves from one short run to the other short run by adjusting its capital from time to time. It's just that adjusting capital is difficult and you can't do it instantly, whereas adjusting labor is relatively easy. You can hire and fire labor pretty much instantly. And so labor is definitely more, like the amount of labor that you can have is definitely a more flexible variable than the amount of capital that you can have. And so the lifespan of a firm is that sequence of short runs in between which it adjusts the amount of capital that it has. And so think about that sequence as the long run. So in the long run, you can decide, okay, how many factories you're going to have, where those factories are going to be located, whether you're going to be producing cars or, I don't know, microwaves. So all these decisions are variable in the long run. But if you just opened a car factory, you're locking yourself into a particular short-run decision and you have to live with it for at least a while. That is the difference between the short run and the long run. Next, deriving costs in the short run. How do we calculate how much it costs to produce in the short run? Here's the idea. Just like I said, the capital is fixed, and the only decision that the firm has to make is how much to produce and how much labor to hire. And I'm not going to focus on the price side of the equation of how much to produce. I'm going to say here, suppose that we want to produce a particular amount of output, say Q units of output. What would be the best way to do so? This is the question that I'm going to focus on today. And in addition, I'm also going to focus on a very particular production function called the Cobb-Douglas production function. It simply says that the number of units that the company produces is some constant C times the amount of capital that you have raised to the power A times the amount of labor that you have raised to the power B. And don't be scared by the exponents. It's just a way to make things nice and smooth when we start graphing things for the long run. So don't even bother thinking about them right now. It shouldn't be a problem. And for example, I'm going to give you the following function. It's going to be 10 times capital to the 1/2 times labor to the 1/2. And you should remember that 1/2 stands for the square root. So basically, no matter how much capital you have, take the square root of it, and that's going to be the translation into your production function. So here's the question. How much would it cost to produce exactly Q units if you have 25 units of capital? this is the standard setup for the short run. Level of capital is fixed. You don't have to decide on that. For some reason, you've locked yourself into this level of capital. Now you have to decide, given you want a particular amount of output, how much labor input you need to take. And so then, well, first step that we'll do is we're going to simplify the production function a little bit because capital is fixed, so we can treat the capital component of the production function as a constant and just plug in 25 instead of the capital. And so then the production function becomes 10 times square root of 25 times square root of the amount of labor, so 50 times square root of labor. And now the problem is, from the algebra perspective, is we know Q, we know how much we want to produce. Let's solve that equation for L, the amount of labor, so the number of workers or the number of hours we would want to hire somebody to produce output for you. And so treat Q as known, L is unknown, and first divide both sides by 50. So square root of L is Q over 50, then square things up to get back to L. And so that would give you L equal to Q squared over 2500. This is the idea that if you want to, say, produce 100 units of output, that means your Q squared is going to be 10,000, and you need to hire 4 units of labor to produce 100 units of output. If you want a different amount, say 50, you need to hire 1 person, and so on. This equation simply tells you how much labor you need to hire to produce a certain amount of output. And now when we want to finally move on to the costs, well, we can say, well, total cost of production is the cost of hiring labor at the market wage rate of W plus the cost of hiring capital at the market interest rate. And we know that Q squared over 2500 is the amount of labor that we need to hire, so multiplied by W, plus 25 is the amount of capital that we have in the short run, and this number does not change at all, multiplied by the interest rate on capital, and you'll get your total costs. And if you were to know the actual wage rate and interest rate, you'll have total cost as an expression solely in terms of the number of units that you have to produce. Because the decisions of how much to produce and how much labor to hire are tied to each other through the production function. That is the whole idea in the short run. Thank you.